I would be one of those parents. I'd go to the baby food aisle. I would say organic banana, and I would buy the crap out of that stuff because I would think in my naive heart that food companies have my baby's best interest in mind, and they don't.
How do you guys get started?
Well, let's see, we could go way far back. So I was a sick little kid. I was always taking antibiotics for ear, nose, and throat things. I ate garbage. I ate the processed food of the 80s, lots of Intamins and Cheese Whiz and crackers and things like that, just really low nutrition foods. And was always sick growing up. And then as an adult, really started suffering with digestive issues. We didn't know about leaky gut in the 80s. Now we do. So it took me a while to really recover from that. And it was my dad's suggestion to change my diet. My doctor didn't suggest that. The doctor gave me pills, but my dad said, maybe try this paleo diet thing, see if that helps. So I've been doing that for the last 11 years, and food has been a huge part of my healing journey. And when we started talking about start having a family someday, I started looking into what was on the baby food aisle, and it was more than disheartening for me. For me, it was criminal, absolutely criminal that we feed garbage to our children. And I'll let Joe tell a little bit of his story.
Yeah, I'm autistic. I wasn't diagnosed as a kid, so I had a lot of social challenges, also a lot of physical issues, being very sensitive to foods, but was on a personal growth journey, always trying to be better, figuring out how to integrate my autism in adulthood, and diet became a big piece of that for me as well. So when I met Serenity, I fell in love with paleo diet, and with her at the same time, she introduced me to paleo. And that was like a really huge shift in my, physiology, cutting out the inflammatory foods, the sugars, the grains, the things that were just irritating me, and focusing on, more nutrient density. And I've always wanted to have children. I drew pictures of my future babies when I was 5. So I dug those up the other day. So always wanted to have kids. So when we started planning family, we looked for foods. It was just one of the first things we did. And we're very frustrated with what we found, and decided we wanted to make it better.
Yeah. Originally it was just, I started looking for foods that were out there. I didn't see foods that represented what my diet was. So I was like, well, maybe babies are supposed to eat apple juice and rice cereal. I don't know. So I launched into I call it my summer of nerddom. I spent the summer of 2016 reading everything I could about infant nutrition, listening to podcasts, reading people's blogs. Conveniently, a bunch of my kind of health mentors had kids in the last few years. So I was reading about what they were feeding their kids, and every single one of them was making compromises on nutrition for convenience sake. So I knew that there was a white space there. And Joe was in the process of looking for a business to start with a product. He had read Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek and thought that was a pretty cool idea, how to scale a business selling products instead of services. And we did a study. You want to tell them about the study?
We looked into baby foods on the aisle. We actually had a virtual assistant put all 250 organic baby foods into a spreadsheet and looked at all their macronutrient profiles. And those results were quite astounding. They had an average of 9 grams of sugar per pouch. Some had 15 to 20 grams of sugar, right? So, and for a baby, 9 grams doesn't sound that much, but that's like 90 grams of sugar for you or me.
That is zero, right?
And their babies are eating 2 or 3 of these a day. So that's like a Snickers bar worth of sugar that they're eating in these fruit pouches that people think are healthy. It's organic fruit, sounds good, but super, super sugary. But even more concerning the sugar was the lack of fat. Less than 2% had less than 1% had 2 grams or more of fat. So almost no fat on the aisle. And Serenity's summer of nerddom determined that babies need 30 grams of fat a day. That's like 300 grams of fat for you or me. We'd be having to down Kerrygold all day long to eat the amount of fat a baby needs. And the aisle just had 0 fat, and fats are so important building blocks for brain and spine and all these, nutritional developments. And then there were no animal products. Less than 4% of baby foods contain meat. None of that meat was well sourced. It was all just, whatever factory farmed mystery meat. And, so we were like, man, this is tragic because babies need meat. Meat's one of the most important first foods. Breast milk is an animal product.
Absolutely.
Breast milk is mostly fat. So it's like babies need like fat and animal products first and foremost. They don't need fruit. They don't need grains. And yet all the aisle was a bunch of fruit and grain. So we're like, this is crazy. Like there's a massive room for upgrading macronutrients baby food here.
And I just started feeling like my heart was breaking for these babies because they don't get to choose what they eat. Their parents pick for them. Mm. And if I had not been such a sick kid, if I had not had a dad suggest changing my diet, if I had not had the path that I had, if I had not been courageous enough to ignore my doctor's advice to take this pill every day, I would be one of those parents. I'd go to the baby food aisle. I would say organic banana, and I would buy the crap out of that stuff because I would think in my naive heart that food companies have my baby's best interest in mind. And they don't. And it's heartbreaking to like kind of admit that and see that, but it's also been really great for our lives. We've started this cool company. We have the best jobs we've ever had. We're making real change in the world. And I mean, frankly, we feed these to our daughter. So our daughter is growing up much healthier than she would have if we hadn't started the company. Mm-hmm. So it's benefited us in huge ways.
Yeah, they want, I mean, these legacy children's food companies, they want big margins. That's what they want.
That's right.
They don't want the best quality ingredients. I mean, you were talking about fat. I bet you probably don't want them to add more fat because what are the kinds of fats that they're going to add realistically? They're probably going to just pump those packages full of soybean oil and
that's true.
all kinds of junk. Who knows?
I mean, that's right. It's already in there. You know, any meaningful fat is really just in infant formula because it has to be, right? And so they use mostly industrial. In fact, I think I have not found a formula that does not use industrial seed oils aside from ours. That actually anywhere.
Europe or the US.
Yeah, I bought some in Europe, and you're right, the fats were not good. So that's something that we're really, really proud of. And when we first started the company, we started the company 5 years ago, and then we launched products 3 years ago. And we had so many conversations about, is the world ready for us to talk about fat on our package? You know, like our mission was to bring fat back to the baby food aisle. It used to be on the baby food aisle in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. They were eating bone broths and bone marrows and liver and onions and all kinds of baby foods that were actually really healthy. And then we got away from that, and now we're bringing it back. But we decided, you know, for the time being, at least the first few years, we were going to just sort of quietly deliver fat on the nutrition facts panel in the ingredient list. We were not going to just, you know, proclaim it and scream it on the front of our package because we weren't sure the world was ready for it yet. And now it's getting there. It's really fun to see when I read our product reviews from moms and dads, you know, like, oh, this is the only one that has any healthy fats, or I love that it has olive oil, or I love that it has avocado oil, or for our formula product, I really like their wide variety of fats. And so the world is changing. Mm-hmm. I love it.
Fat is back.
Fat is back. It's so important. I mean, you know, I've talked about the fact that the adult brain accounts the resting metabolism of the adult brain accounts for about 25% of an adult's resting metabolic rate. That's a quarter. But in a newborn, that number, that proportion shoots up to 70, 80, 90%. Wow. The brain is just undergoing such tremendous growth and organization. And so that's why nutrition is so important for the developing brain, and especially those fats, because those fats become the building blocks that the organism, that the neonate uses to construct nervous tissue, the tissue that comprise the nervous system.
Mm-hmm. So there's no better fat than meat fat. You know, animal fats are, you know, just I can tell just from my own body, but with our daughter and with all the studies and the anthropological data on the role of animal products in developing the human brain over time. I mean, it's just such an important thing to have fatty cuts of meat available to babies. And that was really the basis of our initial recipes, were the fattiest, well-sourced meat we could find mixed with vegetables, because they do need carbs. You know, breast milk is half carbs, half fat. So, you know, focusing on vegetable carbs as opposed to fruit carbs, which are just sugar, but really getting those quality veggies in there were the basis for the recipes. But really the question we get all the time is, when can my baby eat meat? When can I eat these? When should I start giving her meat? Or like, as soon as you give her food, like first thing that people start with fruits and grains, and it's completely the opposite of what a baby's digestive system is ready for and what they need nutritionally.
Absolutely. And like omega-3 fats, preformed omega-3 fats, choline. I mean, I can't imagine. I feel so bad for children because, as you mentioned, they don't get to pick their food, right? You see these headlines all the time come out about people putting their babies on, these extreme diets, vegetarian diets, vegan diets, basically, basically like, letting their ideology trump the biology of their progeny, which is to me so tragic. I mean, we've seen what comes of that, and it's not good.
It's not good. And I think it's so sad. And, those parents mean well, right? They're trying to do what's best for their kid. And they just, in my opinion, don't understand all of the data. And so that's one of our other big missions is how do we continually answer the question, when can I feed my kid meat? And also, why should I feed my kid meat? How do we educate parents in a way that is not shameful, that is clear and simple, just so that people can really understand the implications of their choices that they're making for their kid.
And we just got to make it easier. It's really
being a parent
so hard being a parent, and like getting them to eat anything is so hard. So of course it's very attractive to use sweet tasting foods because a baby's going to eat it a lot faster, and so like it's literally addictive. It's hyper palatable. So what we really did was focus on very good tasting blends. We made our meat and veggie blends optimized for flavor, and the fat really actually makes the flavor taste a lot better, and so other baby food companies have tried to make some savory or even some meat products that just didn't sell. Babies just didn't like them because they were bland and they were not fatty and the ingredients were low quality. So we focus on these like really good quality meats that taste better, plenty of fat, really good veggie blends, and it makes it easy to feed the kid. Plus it's shelf stable in the, packaged in a shelf stable pouch so they can eat it straight out of the pouch. So we just, we think that parents really, really do want to feed their kids better. They either don't know how or they just really hard, and so our mission is really to make it easier for parents to feed their kids healthy, because every parent I know wants to feed their kids healthy. They either just don't know what healthy means and they think industrial seed oils and fruit are healthy, or they might know, but like Serenity's mentors, like they don't have any other options. Like sometimes I got to give them the pouch. And if there's no pouches like ours to give them, they're going to give them the fruit purees.
Mm-hmm. As parents, what do you guys do to make healthy, albeit bland foods more palatable and more desirable for your kids?
Yeah.
So we're not afraid to use seasoning and salt. So there's a lot of studies, I've read them. I didn't particularly think they were very good studies, but that say that feeding kids salt under the age of 1 is really a no-no. And I disagree with that. I think the type of salt matters. I think that
they were all done with sodium chloride.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a processed food.
Completely different food.
It's a different food. So we're not afraid to use seasonings in our foods. We use a lot of butter. I don't know any kids that don't like butter. My kid eats butter by the piece. I was like, what do you want for dinner? Butter and bacon and a pickle. I'm like, here you go.
Smear everything in butter, add Himalayan sea salt. That's like the first trick. So
those work really well. We're a mostly dairy-free household because I don't do dairy very well. Joe eats a little bit. Mm-hmm. So we can't do the kind of traditional mac and cheese type thing, but we do have some lentil noodles, which are actually really great. A company called Bentilia. And I've been really enjoying those with butter and salt. It's sort of a standard kid food that actually has some nutrient density into it.
Yeah.
And
ultimately with kids, it's just about offering it to them a lot. It can take dozens and dozens of offers.
I read somewhere like 100. Sometimes you have to offer it 100 times.
And a lot of parents think, they wouldn't eat, they liked this yesterday, they don't like it today, they must not like it anymore. I've run into that trap where I'm like, she doesn't like olives anymore. And then like I give olive the next day, and then she's like olives again, so it's like constant giving them food, exposing them to new foods, putting having 6 to 10 different options on their plate at every meal. So they get to choose, because they're highly intuitive around what they need, even if, and they're, changes day to day. So it's about just giving them healthy foods all the time and being really clear that if you don't give them hyperpalatable foods, if you don't give them addictive foods, their system can self-regulate and decide what they want.
And then the flavor window is really important. So from a baby's first foods, the 6-month-ish range to about 18 months, that's where they're developing their palate for the rest of their life. So if you're able to introduce foods that taste bitter, salty, sweet, sour, umami, all those different kinds of flavors, and really get them excited and used to eating those kinds of things, then throughout their life, those flavors are going to seem like comfort food, like what they're used to eating. So a lot of our products, like we make broccoli puff, a little snack puff, and it actually tastes like broccoli, and it's got spinach in it, and it has a real umami and, a little bit of that greens kind of bitter taste. And so we're really hoping that this is setting this, these products just launched. So it's hard to get feedback from 10 years from now, but we're really hoping that this helps set the stage to where they're going to like those tastes and those kinds of foods and the mouthfeel of the fat, right? All that kind of thing throughout the rest of their life.
I met a guy the other day who he enjoyed steak, but the only cut that he would ever eat was a filet mignon. He would only eat filet mignons because he's so afraid of fat. And I was like, you're probably not afraid of fat, the texture of fat. You're probably more afraid of like collagenous tissue.
Gristle.
Gristle and like some weird piece that you bit into when you were a kid. I think it's so important to it's like exposure therapy in a way, to expose your kids to a variety of different tastes and textures. Because if you don't, what ends up happening is you get people like that, like people who enter adulthood and spend a significant chunk of their lives with this like 12-year-old boy palate. They only want like white bread, like the most palatable kind of bread for them is like white bread with like some kind of like deli meat on it and ketchup. And it's just it's like their palate is like, it's retarded in the sense that it hasn't been able to develop in the way that an adult palate should.
That's right. And that's what we're going for, is a mature palate. And our 3-year-old, we've been giving her these foods since she was little. Her first foods were ours. I swore I was going to make my own baby food because it's fresh. It's better when it's fresher. 0 times did I ever make my own purees because we had these great ones already in a pouch, right? And one of her favorite foods is olives. She likes okra and, just kind of unusual things for a 3-year-old. I think, she still eats hot dogs, well-sourced hot dogs. And like I said, we make her the lentil noodles and butter, but she also has a little bit more expanded palate.
She was on a scallop fiend for a long time. She
salmon,
scallops and crab, but she goes through phases. She'll drink bone. Somebody made her liver bone broth. Like she'd puree a liver with bone broth, give it to her in a bottle as a supplement to breast milk when she was little, and she drank the crap out of that stuff. She loved that liver bone broth.
That's awesome. When I was a kid, I was super picky. My mom gave me the nickname Mean Face because I was just like,
oh no.
But but now I've grown up to become an adult that loves to try new things. And that doesn't mean that you can't have preferences and things like that. You can, of course, but I think it's just really important to always be willing to challenge the narrative that you have about your preferences.
I was a picky eater too. Until I was 13, I would eat a hamburger with cheese and ketchup. That's it. Plain cheese pizza. That's it. Like really simple things. And then I will never forget, my grandmother taught me a really important lesson. And she said, Rennie, because that was my nickname when I was a kid. Rennie, what are you going to do when you go over to a friend's house and they serve you something that you don't like? And, a 13-year-old, like friends are everything. And I was like, man, she's right. What am I going to do? And I remember I started with broccoli and I would put tamari sauce all over it to just make it not taste like broccoli. And I started with fish. I would eat, fried junky fish from a fast food place, but I actively learned to eat those things because I wanted to stop being so picky, and it was a choice I made.
There's hope for everyone.
There's hope for everyone.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're like, obviously, as you guys mentioned, parenting is super hard, and I'm not a parent, so I'm not even going to pretend to know how difficult it actually is. I mean, I have a concept of how difficult, but I would imagine that if I had, if I had kids and they were screaming in the backseat of the car and they were starving and I was driving from one, obligation to the next, and I had to get them food, like fast food every once in a while, it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world. But, as a parent, I think you just have to kind of be able to place that food within the context of their greater, of their diet, of their dietary pattern as a whole. And maybe it's a 90-10 rule. Or an 80-20 rule. I mean, that's fine. Those are great. Most people, most infants, or not infants necessarily, but children, there's this sobering statistic that adults now consume 60% of the calories that we consume come from ultra processed foods. That number is even higher for children. It's about 70-80%. And that's what kids are eating just all the time. So, as long as you can be better than that.
Yeah.
The bar's low. The bar's low.
Yeah. We don't judge parents. It's such a hard thing. And, we really want to make it easier. And we don't believe that being super strict or crazy with kids' diets is useful. Yeah. It was just Halloween. Della, was really old enough at 3 to really have fun trick-or-treating and understand Halloween, and ate maybe 5 pieces of candy is my guess she ate, which is like more candy she's ever had in her whole life. And she got a stomachache, gave her stomachache. Mm-hmm. And she was like, my tummy hurts from, she's like, why is my tummy hurt? Because you ate all that candy. She didn't touch the rest of that candy. So just letting them have that experience. She loves cake. She always looks forward to the birthday cake or the wedding cake we let her have, half a piece of cake, little couple bites of cake. It's a special occasion. We're not crazy about gluten and sugar. I love cake. Serenity loves cake. So it's just like that, not, turning things into off limits where it's like, this is, you're never allowed to have it, which could lead to binging on it in secret, but also just not having it in the house. I mean, it's pretty easy to you keep your house stocked with nutrient-dense foods. If they eat something at a restaurant, they eat something at a friend's house, grandma gives her a cookie, whatever, but even just for adults, that's like, even us, if we go to a restaurant, we might, get something that's not fully paleo or whatever, but it's not in our house. So we get that, like you said, that kind of 90-20. Yep. 90-20 rule.
90-20. The math doesn't quite add up there. Yes. But 90-10, 80-20. Yeah. It's all good. You guys mentioned that discovering the paleo diet was really was transformative in terms of your guys' health. Can you lay out the tenets? Like what are some of the founding principles of the paleo diet that you guys adopted that helped you see such success?
Yes. So for me, I read Rob Wolf's book and Mark Sisson's book, and this was 11 years ago. So it's kind of the early days. And I had studied anthropology in undergrad. And once I read the introduction to Rob Wolf's The Paleo Solution about how humans had been eating the same diet for almost our entire existence through evolution, and only recently we've changed to an agricultural diet. And after that, our health has become much worse. That was enough for me. So basically what I did right away, so I was in graduate school at the time and I didn't have a whole lot of time to do research on anything other than what I was studying. But I went gluten-free right away because my stomach was killing me and I didn't know what else to do. So I went gluten-free and grain-free right away. That worked really well. Then I cut out legumes and beans, and took me 2 years to finally admit that dairy was not something that my body loved. So instead, I was just really focused on eating more vegetables. I mean, who couldn't eat more vegetables? Lots of people, right? Most Americans. In fact, I could probably still use more veggies. So lots of veggies, and then clean meats. So the sources of the meats is pretty important. We used to have an uncured bacon flavor in our line that is no longer, but we're working to bring it back. And the pork farmer that we worked with, he had pasture raised pork, which is very difficult to find. It's actually very difficult to do, but he did some studies. He mailed a Walmart pork chop into the lab, and he mailed one of his pork chops into the lab. And the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio was unbelievably better in his pork than in the Walmart one. So really focusing on the source is super important. So I started just researching the sources of my meats, buying wild caught salmon, buying as much grass-fed beef that I could afford at the time. And then a little bit of fruit and a little bit of nuts. I would do a little bit of that here and there. Right now I'm going more low carb. So my fruit is almost nil at this point, but that's kind of what it was. Mostly veggies, clean meats, healthy fats, a little bit of fruit and nuts.
What I really liked about paleo was it's focused on what to eat, not what not to eat. All these diets and vegetarianism and veganism, they all focus on eliminating stuff. And that's where people always want to go. Like, what can I not eat? But everybody knows you can be vegetarian and live on cheese pizza all day long, right? It's just not necessarily mean you're healthy to just not eat certain classes of food. We know keto people that, eat cheese all day long, right? It's not healthy. So it's really not what not to eat. It was about focusing on nutrient density. Like, what are the most foods that the human body needs the most of, which we know now are, well-sourced animal products, vegetables, fats, and then if you eat other stuff, fine, but don't have it be the cornerstone of your diet. Like grain, if you eat some grain, if you can tolerate dairy, fine. Just don't let it, if you're really focusing on optimal nutrition or you have a health problem or you're raising a baby, so forth, focus on the nutrient dense first, fill your plate with that. And then if there's, you want to have a snack or you want to have a treat, whatever. And it's not about being guilty or being like purist or
dogmatic
or punishing yourself for wanting to have, some grain or sugar or whatever. And then also that it tastes good. Meat and veggies taste great. High fat tastes awesome. If you go to a fancy restaurant, basically what they're going to serve you is paleo. If they gave you a plate of fruit and rice, you'd be like, excuse me, send this back, and they're going to give you our grass-fed beef with sweet potato and kale. That's the ingredients to this baby food pouch. That's what you get at a fancy restaurant. That's like your most gourmet foods.
Night out.
They also happen to taste awesome, and healthy food doesn't have to taste bad, right? People think it's bland or it's boring. I think,
it's like cardboard.
The low fat vegetarian movement really made it seem like eating grass was healthy, and it's like, it's not, right? Like actually healthy food tastes great if you do it right. And you don't have to deny yourself to eat healthy. In fact, the healthiest foods are already really, really tasty.
Absolutely. A steak with some veggies and a sweet potato sounds like something I would eat.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
It is. That's my favorite comment when we do, back in the day when we were doing lots of tastings and trade shows and things, my favorite comment from people was, oh, I'd eat that, or that's not too gross, or, it's not gross. That's surprising.
Baby food is usually gross. If it's not sugar, it's kind of nasty, and ours are actually quite tasty.
Yeah. I mean, I bought my cat like this dry food the other day. That's like wild salmon, all organic, pastured, everything, veggies. There's no grain, no potato flour, no byproducts. I'm like, I would eat that as a snack.
Did you try it?
Well, because it's for a cat that it's like probably very high in protein. I didn't try it. Maybe I will for on Instagram live.
Yeah. All right. I'll watch you. I'll watch for it.
I mean, who knows? But that's so cool. So, I mean, the question that I think a lot of parents are going to have, when you're buying for quality, sometimes that can drive the price tag up a little bit.
That's right.
Do you guys have any tips in terms of how to economize? You guys are a young family. There's a lot of young families out there. Times are tough out there. It's a tough world. What are some ways that you guys make it work from a financial standpoint, buying such high quality for your kids? Well,
buying in bulk is really useful. So we just bought a giant stand-up freezer, and Joe bought a quarter of a cow. Half a cow. So it by the pound is much lower from a cost perspective. It's still really high quality. It's locally sourced. It's grass-fed. And we just filled our freezer up with it. So Costco is also a good place. They actually have some decent sourcing. You can get organic chicken, you can get grass-fed beef there, and a lot of organic veggies. And then we like cooking in bulk too. So if you're buying in bulk, it's convenient to get a giant, we have the biggest Instant Pot, and we'll cook up 3 pounds of chicken breast and a tortilla soup kind of base, and then freeze a whole bunch of it. And then you've got some for today, some for next week, to where, cooking when you have a family also takes a lot of time and energy.
I think there's
you guys mentioned that you have like 9 different things on the plate for your kid at any one time. How do you guys make that work with such busy schedules?
Yeah, it's a lot of it's just, a piece of pickled okra, pre-boiled egg, some lunch meat that's cut up, right? Some baby carrots, and then whatever we're eating. So it's like there's sort of those things. We do batch cook a lot to save time. Some freeze, some just eat on throughout the week. But I think cost with food is really a mindset. We have artificially cheap food in this country. Like we have cheated.
Subsidized.
Yeah, we've cheated the planet. We've cheated nutrition to save money. And now food is artificially cheap. We can survive on it, but it's, our health is paying a huge price for that. The planet is paying a huge price for it. So in my opinion, what you don't spend on food, you're going to pay in healthcare costs, if not many times over. And, it's just, how do you put a price on optimal nutrition, on not being sick? I don't know how often you get sick, but when I'm sick, it's like, if I could have paid $1,000 to not be sick, I was like, would pay it, right? And then you think about cancers and learning disabilities and emotional and mental disorders. And, 1 out of 5 kids is, 1 out of 3 kids is diagnosed obese. 1 out of 5 is diagnosed with a social or emotional disorder by the age of 16, and so it's like, diabetes, there's all these really awful conditions that are highly diet related that spending the right amount of money on food will prevent. It is more expensive, but we just have to think of it. It's like the real cost. So
food is medicine, right? Our
products are the real cost of food. And we've done our best to make it convenient to, get the price to an affordable place. But ultimately it is double. Our purchase cost double the next most expensive fruit puree.
Yeah, if you're getting applesauce versus steak.
Yeah, it's going to cost more. Right? Versus steak versus grass-fed steak.
Yeah.
So paying more for better sourcing. But again, it's 80-20 rule like we're talking about, right? So, it's just like focus on the most nutritious, spend what it costs for the most nutritious foods, and then you supplement with lower cost foods here and there is fine. It's just really, it's worth it.
Yeah, I agree. Talk to me about the difference between infant formula and what I've seen marketed as toddler formula. Are they the same? Are they different? Are they interchangeable? What's the deal?
It's a great question. So, obviously breast milk is the ideal food for babies. That's what babies, really need, ideally till at least age 2. There's no problem going all the way till age 4, depending on the mom and what they're willing to do. So breast milk is super key. Now, there's lots of issues with breastfeeding. It's very challenging. It's very hard. There's a lot of myths about it. So a lot of moms end up wanting or needing to supplement with formula before that 6-month mark where they can eat food. Our baby weaned herself at 9 months old, where she'd already started eating foods, but then just stopped breastfeeding at 9 months for whatever reason. And we, needed to continue to supplement, and just regular milk was not as nutritious as we wanted to give. So we had looked at formulas for at that point, and didn't like anything that was on the market. And so there's ultimately the toddler formula market is largely a result of the FDA's restrictions on regulations of infant formula. We have the most complicated restrictions in the world that we know of. It makes it very hard for new innovative companies like us to sell an infant formula because they require these infant feeding studies that take 3 years and several $1 million to do in order to become infant formula certified in the US. Europe doesn't have those standards.
Wow.
We haven't updated the US hasn't updated their infant formula standards in several decades. 1980.
Yeah, the Infant Formula Act of 1980.
1980 was the last time they updated the standards. So the current infant feeding, the infant formula standards are from 1980. So you imagine how much nutrition has changed. Europe updated theirs last year, right? So they're constantly updating them. So European formula is naturally higher quality because there's less barriers to entry for newer companies to innovate. Their standards are a lot better. So our formula that we launched, we have this grass-fed whole milk A2 formula, and it's launched as a toddler formula. We're not allowed to recommend it to infants. We call it a toddler formula, and we put on there that it's for 12 months and up, because the FDA says in order to call it an infant formula or recommend it for babies under 12 months, you have to have completed these infant feeding studies, which we are working on gathering the resources to begin. But it, like I said, takes 3 years. So it'll be 3 years till we can recommend this product for infants. Now, if you look at all the nutritional requirements for infant formula, you look at Europeans' infant formula standards, our formula meets all of them. So it's really up to a mom at this point or a dad or any caregiver to decide what I want to feed my baby, to do the research, to talk to their health provider if they're confused, to look at the regulations and decide. So it's really up to any parent to decide what to feed their baby. We're not allowed to call it infant formula or recommend it. But if you do the research and compare our formula to others, you're going to see that it meets all those standards and is better than any of the infant formulas out there. It's better, much better fat sources. The other ones all have industrial seed oil. Ours has no industrial seed oil. It's 8 different fat sources. So this really well-rounded fat profile that all came from extensive research on breast milk. We worked with Dr. Sarah Valentine to map the nutritional profile of breast milk. She studied over 200 research papers globally on breast milk to look at what the optimal composition of breast milk is and how can we mimic that. She looked at hundreds of ingredients, and we worked with her and all kinds of scientists to piece together this recipe that is the closest to breast milk of any other formula ever created. In terms of the A2 protein, beta casein protein, which is the same beta casein protein as is in breast milk. Most other cow's milk is A1 protein, so genetic mutation. So ours is exclusively A2.
Which is easier to digest than A1.
Yeah, exactly. It's more natural to humans, more like breast milk. We use the whole milk. Almost no formula is whole milk. They use non-fat milk. They take the fat out because it's cheaper, and then they add the fat back in with industrial seed oil. So we keep all the milk fat in there, add in other great fats like cacao,
cocoa butter,
olive oil, coconut, like really, really great, fat sources. We really upgraded the vitamin profile so that the added vitamins are the most bioavailable.
We use methylated B vitamins wherever we can,
instead of the traditional folic acid, which can be inflammatory. So across the board, we include fiber. Almost no baby food formula has fiber.
And one of my favorite parts about it is the carb source. So, like Joe said, the calories from breast milk are about half fat and half carbs. And almost every single formula has a junky carb source, but we use lactose, organic lactose, 100%. We don't have any fillers like maltodextrin, no corn syrup solids, nothing that's non-nutritive. Everything that we've added ingredient wise is not just to meet a macronutrient profile. It's also to meet the micronutrient profile. It's to meet the fatty acid profile. And it's something I'm really, really proud of.
And there's no reason not to give it to toddlers. It's not like you can't give a toddler formula or a toddler formula. Like it is in what we've created is milk plus, right? So like people say, well, they say just to give whole milk to toddlers. Well, like, if you can find regeneratively farmed grass-fed A2 whole milk in your grocery store, great. But most people can't find that. So even just for that reason alone, our formula is a little better than just the milk you buy. But then all those other, vitamins and nutrients that I mentioned are superior to milk. And so it is a great food to continue to give toddlers as they grow.
And the formula in particular, we've been getting reviews from parents that are saying that their kid just can't tolerate cow's milk. It's got a different weight to casein ratio, and it is a lot harder to digest, frankly, than our product, because we've carefully constructed the whey to casein ratio and
whey to casein ratio. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we're getting a lot of feedback from parents who maybe have kids that are a little underweight, that they're trying to get more nutrition into as a toddler. And so that's one of the big uses for toddler formula, is for either kids who can't digest regular cow's milk or goat's milk, and kids that just need a little bit more calories from really good sources.
Yeah. If your doctor says to take Pediatric, do our formula. Don't it's an alternative to the Pediatric kind of fortified beverages that are all nasty.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the formulas that I've seen, first of all, they're put out by these huge like pharmaceutical companies, right?
Yeah.
That take this like reductionist approach. It's like they've created like Soylent for your baby. Essentially, it's like this totally like the term nutritionism, like they think that they've broken down what a baby needs into the exact micronutrient formula, but then to source the ingredients to hit those various thresholds, they're sourcing, as you said, corn syrup solids, maltodextrin, canola oil, soybean oil. So that like when you zoom out on paper, maybe it vaguely, if you squint your eyes a little bit, so that they blur, it looks maybe vaguely like a suitable food for a human neonate, right? But what's so great about what you guys, why I'm so happy to get behind it, is that it's whole food, right? It's like whole food as nature intended, pureed. It's amazing.
Yeah. Vitamins, they're actually really new. They're only like 100 years old. We didn't even know about vitamins before the scientific method in the early 1900s, right? So I think that what we know about nutrition is the teeny tiniest slice of the pie that you've ever seen, like the smallest little piece of pie you've ever had. I think it is so small. And we've worked with people in the industry who come from those big companies, and they truly do believe, their hearts are in the right place. They do believe they found the answer. But like Joe said, we haven't updated our regulations, and therefore no research has been done, or at least not in a big, meaningful way, in 25 years. And it is, it's so sad to think that, it's just a mindset. It's factory processed foods versus whole foods. Clearly the whole foods are the better choice. And it just baffles me how people can think otherwise.
Yeah, it goes back to the paleo argument. We've been studying food for 100 years. Breaking down its nutrients and trying to replicate them. But we've been eating for 500,000 years on this planet. And the 95% plus of that was spent hunter-gathering, eating plants that we foraged, animals that we hunted, bugs that we found, that was what we ate. So rather than try to say, hey, what's the science? How do we break this down and control it? More of a surrendered approach of like, hey, we're humans. How did humans live? How did we survive this long? What are the foods that feel right to our bodies, right? That taste good, that are intuitively the right things. And that's where I think the paleo movement really wins, is like looking at a different kind of approach.
And the paleo movement has kind of ignored like the needs of infants and toddlers. Until you guys.
Right.
It's just like, that's what we found.
Well, we were at Paleo FX, a conference in Austin in 2016, when we started talking about having a family, and I kind of started getting like fuzzy and maternal. And I'm like, Joe, let's go find the baby stuff here. We looked at every booth. I found a chiropractor that worked on pregnant women, but that was the only thing that we found even remotely close to for kids. There was granola bars and things, better granola bars and snacks and things, but we didn't find anything. And I went up to the head of Paleo FX, because I used to work for them, actually. It's here in Austin. And I said, Michelle, where's the baby stuff? And she said, I ask myself that question every year. I wonder, when is it coming? And then the following year, we were there.
Yeah. And as soon as we started it, the paleo movement got way behind us. Yeah. Everybody we talked to was so ready for that to be brought to babies and toddlers, and just nobody done it yet.
In fact, we talked to 3 or 4 different people who had made plans to start a baby food company. They're like, well, I bought this URL. Do you want this one? Or, I've got some research here.
I got cavebaby.com. Do you want that? We're like, I don't think we're going to call it Cave Baby, but thanks. Yeah.
And you just called it your name. You don't get easier to remember than that. Yeah.
That's right. They said make it personal, and Joe Kids wasn't quite as poetic.
Joe Kids.
We just used my name. It worked.
I love it. What are some of your favorite flavors like that seem to be doing the best?
Good question. Well, our OG flavors are doing the best right now.
So the grass-fed beef I held up earlier is my favorite. It's always my favorite. It's Della's current favorite again. She's gone around back to it again. Our Della. The free-range chicken with organic pea and carrot.
That's one of my favorites.
Is the top favorite. Like everybody This is like the best.
It was the
seller.
first one we ever created in our kitchen. We delivered it around to our friends in town, and we filled our own pouches with a pouch filler from Amazon.
Yeah.
And babies loved it.
We have a new line of bone broth pouches that have bone broth, meat, veggies, and functional herbs.
Oh
so
my God.
the flavors are a lot richer. So this is our turkey bolognese.
That's my favorite of those.
This is a real super popular one. Della also really likes
So this one has green pea, free range turkey bone broth, pastured turkey, tomato paste, olive oil, garlic, Himalayan sea salt, basil, and oregano, all organic stuff.
Sounds so good. So you just open it up and babies like they
So they just drink it.
They drink it. They squeeze it in like a.
Yeah, squeeze it in.
For little bitty babies, you might want to try it on a spoon, just because it really helps their mouth to form all the muscles properly, eating from a spoon actually versus sucking from a straw. So with early young infants, you want to try the spoon feeding at first.
Yeah. But as an older kid, they can feed themselves, which they love. They can eat it. And I love it because I want to sit there and feed them. But she'll eat as many of these as we let her eat. She's probably eating about 4 or 5 a day right now at age 3. So she's well past the need for purees, but they just make such a great snack.
Convenient.
She loves them. They're nostalgic for her. And the ingredients are so great that it's like, why not just let her eat them? I mean, if it was going to do a packaged food.
And then hand me that Puffs one.
And then,
this one's my favorite.
The
I
newest
made
puff.
pumpkin and cinnamon, pumpkin spice puffs. Woo, woo.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
I mean, adults can eat that too, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
are they tasty to the adult palate?
they actually are. They're pretty mild, so they're not going to like punch you in the mouth like a Dorito or something.
But they're very satisfying.
They're probably not as salty, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They're not as salty.
But they're real nice crunch. I mean, the texture of the puffs are great because it's a crunchy snack that also melts in your mouth if you don't have teeth. So for a baby who doesn't have much teeth, they can still eat them and they'll just kind of dissolve, or like a Cheerio kind of. But for us, we can eat them and they're crunchy and it's just easy. It's very easy to eat.
In my opinion, for the adult palate, I think that the tomato mushroom bone broth puffs
we added bone broth
are particularly nice because they've got that umami flavor and they got some protein in there.
I like the broccoli spinach puff. This is my favorite puff. It's like got that really rich greens flavor. Mm-hmm. I think it's the most potent of the flavors that we have. It's
strong.
The babies actually really like it. So it really introduces that flavor, and the bone broth, that's that rich umami flavor in there too. And we're the first ones to snackify bone broth. Nobody's put bone broth in a snack before. So we're very proud.
It tastes so good. Why not?
Yeah. And we do have a line of veggie products. So we do also these vegetable fat products. This is the squashes. It's kabocha squash, butternut squash, and pumpkin with olive oil. And so it's this interesting carb fat combo that tastes really a great way to introduce the taste of vegetables, because the meat veggie combos, the meat can be a little more forward. The veggies are really strong flavors here. And this makes a really nice side dish. She's eating like a hot dog. This is Bella's favorite is the squashes. The roots, I think the roots is my favorite. It's, sweet potato, carrot, beet, and olive oil.
And those ones are nice. I mean, I think
adults like those a lot.
As an adult, if I need a veggie snack, if I'm traveling or something, and I'm not going to eat the garbage in the airport anymore. So I just snack on those, and those ones are a little more palatable for adults than like pureed meat.
I like the bone broth ones. When I had my mouth surgery, I ate bone broth ones. I keep them in my night table. If I wake up hungry and I need a snack, I just squeeze the turmeric chicken's my favorite. Squeeze the turmeric chicken pouch down and go back to bed.
And like competing products just have like added sugar, unhealthy oils.
Yeah,
is that kind of like the lay of the land? It's
basically fruit and grain. I mean, so in the pouches, you've got fruit with some vegetables. So about roughly a quarter vegetables, 3/4 fruit is basically the aisle if you don't look at ours, with no fat, no meat, essentially, pretty much zero. And then ours is the opposite. It's all vegetables and meat, no fruits, no grains. Once you get off the pouches, you start to really see more grain and more added sugar. So the puffs, the bars, the teething biscuits, the melties, that's where you start to see lots of straight up cane sugar or fruit sugar used in such a way that's basically added sugar, like it's just the sugar extracted. And then lots of grain. You see a lot of rice, which we now know is very high in arsenic. There's been a lot of controversy with how much arsenic is on the baby aisle because of their over-reliance on rice as a carb source. So the bars, the other puffs, the infant cereals, the teething biscuits, they're almost all rice. So we were really the first grain-free snack in that segment. And we're working on creating a lot more of those to replace and upgrade all of the other foods. But again, for us, it's not just about taking out the grain. It's about adding in nutrient density. And I think that's what some companies don't quite get. They're like, oh, I can replace the rice with sorghum or quinoa. And it's like, sounds better than rice, but it's like, but there's really still no nutrition. It's still just a filler. Maybe it's lower in arsenic, but like when we've launched our products, that's like, it's 100% nutrition. Everything, the puff is vegetables and bone broth and some herb, like some spices.
Yeah.
Like that's it. People are like way more into that than like a sorghum puff.
Yeah. I mean, it's so true. When they will, they'll present like gluten-free versions of whatever junk foods that are predominantly rice flour. And then you'll see like the paleo approved versions that are basically the same thing, but with the rice flour removed and cassava flour substituted. And it's ultimately the same. I mean, it's like the same product for the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were really sad. We went to Expo West the first year we went, 2017 or something.
It's a big food trade show.
It's the health food trade show out in Anaheim every year. And we were walking around and we were like, man, we're starving. Where can we go get some food? So we couldn't find any place to get
food
lunch.
At a health food trade show.
And we were talking to
couldn't eat.
Yeah. And we talked to some strangers that were there. They're like, oh, aren't you so full? I've been eating all day.
We're
and I'm like,
no,
you've been eating this garbage all day?
Yeah. If you took out the sugar, the grain, and the coffee, basically the whole show was sugar, grain, and coffee in some different combinations of that. Some were sugar, grain, coffee. It was crazy. It's like just nuts. So now it's gotten a lot better. Epic Bar brought meat back to health food. I mean, really, 5 years ago, it was hard to get meat in health food stores. And so, maybe 10. So it's like really bringing meat back has been huge. And people were like, still say like, it's so bold of you to have meat on your packaging in a health food store. We're like, it's not really bold. It's 500,000 years, like that's what we survived on. Like, it's weird to me that they still think it's bold, but there's still so much vegetarian, vegan stuff, all this new innovation, trying to make meat-free products. And it's like, why, it's like, that's not,
it's just not, that's not what we,
just more processed, more fake, low nutrition.
It's basically the equivalent of human pet food.
Oh, yeah. Gross. You're right.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible. And pet food isn't impervious from this push towards plant-based diets either. There's a company that just closed a huge round. They're making like it's vegan food for dogs.
Wow.
You couldn't get away with that for a cat because everybody knows cats are obligate carnivores. But now you have this whole cohort of people putting their dogs on plant-based diets.
There's a vegan cat movement. Like when I was looking at recipes for my cat, there were like all these like, you need to supplement with these amino acids and we ship them to you and they're plant-based aminos. And it was crazy. Like,
I thought that was a joke. Is that really happening?
It's for real. People are that crazy.
Wow.
Like to take a straight up carnivore and mimic their diet. And you know what? Their cats probably don't die, right? Like it's about optimal
quality
diet, right? Like quality of life. Maybe they get sick eventually, but or whatever, but like you can keep an animal alive. We're very resilient. And it's just a matter of what you're measuring, what you're optimizing. The vegans I know all that have been vegan 10 plus years all have some kind of health issue. Like I've yet to see vegans that are like, I'm perfect optimal health, whereas the paleo people I know are like, they could fucking push a train, like they're hardcore.
Yeah. It's a farce, like the push towards, and certainly some people are doing it well. There's some great examples of people doing it well. And if you're listening to this podcast and you're on a plant-based diet and you feel like it's working well for you, by all means, keep doing, keep it up. But yeah, it's definitely not optimal. And I mean, just the fact that it's an important data point that granted, it's just one essential nutrient that we know of that you're not getting on a vegan diet that you have to supplement with, but a diet that creates any kind of deficiency like that's an important piece of information that I think we underappreciate. And then we try to play this cat and mouse game with other nutrients, perhaps the conditionally essential nutrients that we know you're not getting as much of. But as you mentioned, we've only been studying nutrition for the past 100 years. We think we have it all figured out. Like how arrogant can you be? We don't.
That's right. I agree. Yeah. And, there are no wild populations of people that have ever been vegetarian.
Yeah.
So
there's no documentation of
some
societies
that's right. Existed. At some point they've eaten at least insects. So just 20% of their diet. So
there are Inuit communities that only eat meat. You can see communities that survived on nothing but meat, but there aren't any that survived on only plants. Like they required that animal.
So there's no evidence of reproduction working, right. And sustaining the species on such a limited range of nutrients.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're an adult, eat whatever the hell you want. But if you're in charge of a child or a dog or a cat or any other organism, let them eat their biologically appropriate diet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
And if you're standing in the way of that, willfully, you're a criminal.
I agree.
That's how I feel.
I agree with you.
Yeah. Super important. Hey guys, if you enjoyed that conversation, you're going to love this one.
Sure. I've had sort of a winding path with my career. I started out as a teacher, actually. Had a degree in special education and thought that teaching and, being an administrator was going to be my life career. And then I got my first job working with kids with autism and other pretty severe emotional and behavioral challenges, and really fell in love with that and quickly realized that what I was doing in the classroom, it was great, but it was like 6 hours a day. And I had all the parents saying, we need help, we need support, what should I be doing at home? And that really got me interested in delving into more the family side of it. So I went back to school and got a doctorate in clinical psychology so that I could take families from first noticing that there were issues and problems through the diagnostic process and all the way through really family-based treatment. So that led me to opening my own practice, mainly because I don't do well working for other people. I sort of have ways I want to do things based on the research and my experience. And so opened my own practice, really specializing in holistic family-based treatment for kids, all the way from little ones all the way up through young adults. And then along the way, began to realize that everything that I had learned in my educational background and my clinical psychology training, it was getting good results, but there was a missing piece. I started noticing that lots of the kids coming in had common physiological things in their history: eczema, allergies, issues with constipation, with chronic ear infections, things like that. And I went, I wonder what's going on there. And at the same time had two of my own kids, because by that point I was a parent, who were also having some issues. And I was wondering about the connections, and I delved into the research and was really amazed to find this whole realm of scientific literature about the connections between physical health and mental health and brain-based issues for adults and kids that I had never been exposed to or learned about in my traditional clinical psychology training or my education background. And so that got me excited about other things that I could bring to the table for these kids and these families. So I actually went back to school again and got a master's in nutrition and integrative health, and am board certified in nutrition now, because I think that that's such an integral piece to bring to the picture of not only understanding what's at the root of symptoms for a lot of kids, but also what needs to happen from a treatment standpoint to really address these things. So yeah, that's sort of the journey that I've taken with this.
That's amazing. It reminds me of, I was doing a little bit of reading earlier this week about Ansel Keys. Mm-hmm. He was a scientist who he developed the K ration. He was a celebrated scientist, but I think, a lot of people have demonized him over the past couple of years because of this idea, the narrative that he created these very early studies that led to the ultimate demonization of fat, saturated fat, dietary cholesterol, and things like that. But the reason why I bring it up is because, he started to do this research at a time when scientists couldn't fathom that there was a connection between diet and cardiovascular health.
Yeah.
It was at the birth of nutrition science that he really got going. And the way that you're talking sounds like you're very much in that camp where it's like you're making these connections for the first time, that actually diet does have an impact on the health and the functioning of the brain.
Yeah.
Which to me is like, gosh, we've already learned so much just over the past couple of years, and we're only going to learn more in the coming years. So when did you then decide to become a nutritionist?
Yeah, it was really around that time when I started looking at, wow, there's research evidence for this. And I sort of felt like, why is this the first time I'm hearing about this, right? I've been in school forever. I have 2 master's degrees, a PhD, and I don't know anything about this. And that's really what got me interested in, I need to delve into the science here more. I need to understand more of these connections. I'd always felt like, as an adult, I fed myself pretty well, always felt like I was feeding my kids well. And I look back now and I'm like, I would do things so differently based on what I know, but that's what I knew at the time. And it was probably better than still what many people feed their kids. But, when you really delve into looking at the food and mood and brain function connection, of course, it makes perfect sense, right? The brain and the body are totally interconnected. How could it be possible that what we're eating or what we're feeding our kids doesn't have everything to do with their mood, their anxiety, their behavior, their ability to focus? Of course, it inherently makes sense. And yet this is like a fringe position still in some ways, nutritional psychiatry and nutritional psychology are becoming more widely known. There are more professionals interested in looking at that, mainly because the effectiveness of the traditional routes that we've used to treat people with mental health and brain-based issues, not great. And so, there's a lot more people interested in what else can we do. But this is still a pretty revolutionary idea. I mean, if you talk to a lot of even primary care physicians, pediatricians on a basic level, they'll say, yeah, well, food matters. But when a kid comes in with issues, they're not looking at, wow, let's check your vitamin D level or your iron status, or let's talk about what's your kid eating, on a daily basis, or what are some of the challenges there, digging into some of that. It's just not done routinely. And I hope that that's changing. And I hope that that really does become the norm, that, I'd love to say 10 years from now, but maybe 20 years from now, that this is really the standard of care, that things like food, eating habits, lifestyle habits more broadly, sleep, screen time, movement, stress levels, that all of those things are the first things that we're looking at and digging into and talking with families about when kids are struggling, because the data's there that it makes a really big difference. It's just shifting that to be the focus of practice, as opposed to, well, talk to the school about getting some support, or go see a counselor, or here's your prescription. And it's not that any of those things are bad. It's just that there's so much more that we can do to get to the root of these things. And I find that really empowering. I find that empowering as a parent of 4 kids myself. And I find it really empowering for all of the families out there that are struggling with some of these things, that there are really simple, really effective things that you can do.
That's amazing. Well, before we get into those, what are some of the kinds of problems that you see present, I guess, most frequently in your clinic?
Yeah. So my clinic, again, we treat little ones all the way through young adults. So we're seeing anywhere from babies through young adults. That's sort of, it's gotten a little bit older over time. I would say earlier, I'd say like 21. Now we're talking like mid-20s, even up to 30, at this point. And we see a broad range of things. Some of the most common things are ADHD, depression, anxiety, and just more broadly, like behavioral types of disorders. Kids who have what we call dysregulated behaviors. They just seem to not be able to manage themselves well. And then, of course, we see quite a lot of autism spectrum disorder, and then some more what we would call severe presentations, often kids with a very significant trauma history, kids who are maybe born very prematurely and so have a lot of medical challenges along with brain-based, types of things. So, and one of my specialties at the clinic is really treating kids and young adults who have been what we would call treatment resistant, which I hate that term because really it just means that no one's really looked at what's going on. But these are kids who have been placed on all of the different kinds of medications. They've been through the traditional counseling things. They're getting all of those things and they're still not getting better. And those are the cases at this point in my career that are really interesting to me to figure out, why would this be an issue in a kid? What could be going on? What do we need to look at there? And often it involves getting them off of many of the things that maybe they've been put on that are creating additional problems, and looking at more holistically how we can address that for them.
Would you say that rates of these kinds of diagnoses are increasing? Like, are we seeing more ADHD now?
Yeah.
Are we seeing more autism now? Or are we just getting better at like diagnosing them?
Yeah, it's an important question, and the research shows that it's both. So certainly awareness, especially around autism spectrum disorder, that's huge, right? When I started my career in the mid 90s, it was still 1 in 200 kids who was diagnosed. And now we're at like 1, I think the most recent stats are 1 in 29 boys. So there certainly is greater awareness as a piece of it. But we also know that the data shows that really these conditions are on the rise. And it's that whole range of what we call neurodevelopmental disorders. So we can throw, ADHD and autism in there, but also things like learning disabilities, things like mood dysregulation issues, behavioral, kinds of things. Those are all on the rise.
Wow.
And, that really begs the question, what's going on there that so many more kids, are having these issues? But yeah, so it's both pieces.
That's so interesting. What would you say is going on?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's like the crux of the issue, right? Like what's changed in our environment that's causing such a stark increase in these kinds of conditions.
Yeah. And it's not any one thing, it's a lot of things. And so when we look at how not only the environment and the world around us has changed over the last generation, but culturally, the pace of life, the things that are available. So the research shows several things. One is certainly increased toxicity in the environment. So everything from, the nutrient density and quality of food that kids are eating or not eating, to things like air quality and pollution, all of those things, chemicals that kids are exposed to in utero, as well as, during their childhood. So we know those are factors, but there are also factors like screen time. The fact that, when I didn't have my first cell phone, and it certainly wasn't a smartphone. I didn't have a cell phone until adulthood, right? But my kids have grown up with those things around all the time. And so while that's wonderful in many ways, there's also sort of that pendulum swinging of, wow, all of this is there now. And how do we actually regulate and manage that? And we're still trying to figure that out as adults. And then we're supposed to be helping our kids figure that out, right? But there's really compelling data to show that excessive use of screens, of technology, is a piece of what we're seeing on a number of levels with kids. We also have the most sedentary generation in history, and that was pre-COVID. And now with COVID, that's only been exacerbated. The data is really not good coming out of that. So we've got sedentary kids, and people often think about that from the standpoint of physical health, right? Like kids need to move so that they have a healthy weight. Actually, physical movement is critical for brain development and the development of connections in the brain that allow for higher level functions like academic learning, like being able to focus, being able to write your name. All of those things develop on a foundation of lots of experience with physical movement and activity in the environment. So when we have babies and toddlers spending a lot of time now, in front of a screen, swiping, a screen, or just not out there being as active, it has consequences for their brain development and then their later learning and behavior. So we know that there's all of these pieces. There's sleep, sleep quality has diminished. There's the busyness of families. It's one of the biggest things that we see is families are so busy. I think COVID again has helped with that. I'm hoping that many families really analyze what does going quote unquote back to normal need to look like, because for a lot of them, maybe what was normal in terms of the pace of life really wasn't good for them or their kids. So we've got really high stress levels in families, lots of sort of chaoticness and activities, we know that has a negative impact too. So I don't think it's any one thing. I think it's really a perfect storm of lots and lots of things that are coming together to create issues for our kids.
The technology piece is terrifying because, when you look at your average adult these days, they're addicted to their smartphones.
Totally.
And then you give such an addictive device. I was going to call it a substance. When you give it, like, we don't allow our children to have access to addictive substances. And yet we don't bat an eye when we give them these devices that are meant to, chronically elicit these like dopamine spikes on a regular basis. And their brains are not yet developed. So
right. We have no data. It's an entire generation of guinea pigs about what the longer term repercussions of this are going to be. We know in the short term, the data shows that used at an appropriate level, which appropriate, there's sort of a wide range in the studies that have been done, but it's not all detrimental. And it's important that kids learn how to have a healthy relationship with technology because it is here to stay. It provides so many great benefits and it's going to be a part of their lives forever. But it's that finding that middle ground of how do we use it instead of letting it use us? And what does that mean long term? What does that look like for kids who maybe had excessive exposure from a very early age? What does that look like at 10, at 20, at 40? The data so far is concerning. It's not conclusive, but it's concerning. And, one of the biggest issues with that is this idea called displacement, that it's not necessarily the actual exposure to the devices themselves that's the issue. It's that it displaces all the other important things that kids should be doing to support their development, that it takes the place of them getting outside and running around and climbing trees and riding their bikes and, running through the neighborhood with their friends. It takes the place of them having real conversations with people or them doing pretend play on their own or them even just being bored and not having anything to do, which developmentally is a really important thing for kids to be bored. We know that. And kids are rarely bored anymore. And that's problematic. So it's that idea that the devices themselves aren't bad. And there's some question as to whether even the exposure is a problem, although we know it is for eye health and vision and those kinds of things. But it's this displacement. It's that kids are now spending a good portion of their waking hours doing those kinds of things on a screen, as opposed to all of the other really important physical and brain-based things that they need to be doing.
I mean, when I was a kid, I remember being addicted to, I wouldn't say that I was addicted, but I definitely enjoyed playing video games.
Sure.
But when I was a kid, those video games were attached to my television.
Yes.
So when I was in school, when I was going to and from school, when I was sitting in my dad's car, when I was, on the bus going to school, I was, my mind had the ability to wander.
That's right.
Which I guess for kids these days, they've got these devices in their pockets all the time.
Yeah. And that's one of the things. And so often parents will say, well, they're bored, they need something to do. And helping parents to understand that not only is it okay for your child to be bored, they actually need to have the experience of being bored, of not having externally driven activities and stimulation, of having to self-generate ideas, come up with things. And you know what? If they don't, that's okay. Just the experience of being in a room or wandering around outside and actually taking in everything around you. What a profoundly simple but important thing. And for a lot of kids, that is not a part of their experience. And when you get used to, you said the dopamine piece, when you get used to that constant, that next hit of external stimulation, you lose or perhaps don't develop even in the first place, depending on the age of the child, the ability to create that for yourself, the ability to self-generate interesting things, to take action on experiences, on the environment in ways that you can learn from, because you're just waiting passively for the next piece of stimulation to hit you. So I get that it's a challenge sometimes for parents because they say, I need my child to be in front of the iPad. And I say, okay, but let's figure out how to find a balance there. And also, and this is sort of like, am a pretty straight shooter with parents. Just as a parent myself, I can get away with doing that, right? I have 4 kids, so I sort of have some lived experience with that. It's like, okay, I get it. It's easier to have the device babysit a kid, especially over the last year. Like, I get it. But also, we need to look at that as part of our responsibility as a parent and say, if we know that something is inherently not real good for them, and we know there's some other things that they should be doing, then we need to take a look at that. And we need to say, as you said, just like we wouldn't give them access to things that we know are really unsafe or, addictive, we need to look at, some of these things. And electronics are definitely one of them. And, you said the addictive substance is the other addictive substance that we absolutely let kids just have constantly is sugar. Sugar and devices are the two of the biggest addictive substances that we know impact people, not just kids, but people in general. And we've got a whole lot of kids running around with a whole lot of sugar addiction and a whole lot of device, if not addiction, a whole lot of use of those. And, if we would address just those 2 things alone, we'd probably be doing, a lot better than we are.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I was bored one time and I turned a box into a costume.
Yes.
And I turned myself into a robot. I would get actually inside the box, and I put little holes where I told my mom to put in little paper inputs, and I would spit something out. And I was I became a robot when I was in that box.
Yeah.
But I feel like these days, if I had access to, I don't know, like an iPad or something, I mean, I guess there are probably games that allow children to be creative, but within the constraints of the game or the program.
That's right.
Whereas without that, you can kind of, the world becomes your oyster.
That's exactly right. I mean, we have kids who come into the clinic who don't know how to play.
Wow.
Who, when we just put them in a room with lots of things, not electronics kind of toys where you hit buttons and things, but things like blocks, things like puppets, things like empty boxes and craft materials, and just observe what they do with them. There are many kids that really struggle in the absence of some sort of outside direction of what they should do, or they go, oh, this is so boring. I hate this. And I go, oh yeah, it probably is. And for a lot of them, then if you leave them in there, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, suddenly it's opened up this whole world of things. Like they've made a robot costume out of a box and they didn't even know that they could do that. But it's those experiences. And I think that so often parents are so busy, they don't just stop and reflect on what is my child maybe missing out on there, or how could we embed more of that. One day leads to the next. Everybody's just trying to get by. And suddenly you realize, oh my gosh, like my kid, the iPad broke, and now I'm face to face with that my kid doesn't know what to do with themselves. And, how can we shift things? So
yeah. You mentioned sugar. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about nutrition, because that's one of your areas of focus. Yeah. Sugar, there's a lot of misconceptions. There are a lot of sort of, people will, on the internet say that sugar is the worst thing in the world. And then there are people who now are coming out and are sort of almost acting like apologists for sugar.
Yeah.
Which I've seen quite a bit in the fitness community, but I'm sure exists in other realms. So talk to me a little bit about sugar.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest levers that I think, based on the research, we can pull when it comes to wanting to support kids' physical and mental health. Because and sugar's not bad, just like electronic devices aren't bad, right? I think we've lost this ability, whether it's about these topics or virtually anything else at this point, at least in the United States, to have any sort of healthy way of looking at a middle ground with things.
The ability to have nuanced thoughts.
Yeah. And say, wow, probably really almost nothing is all good or all bad. There's probably a middle ground there, and maybe I can understand more about that. So these things fall in that middle ground, right? I think it's a terrible idea to say all sugar's bad, kids should never have it. Well, I mean, first of all, we know that sets kids up for eating disorders, for lots of problematic things when we, just come in and full swoop take everything out of, their diet, don't allow them any access. They don't know how to regulate themselves around it, right?
I want to talk a little bit about this.
Yeah.
So you mentioned eating disorders.
Yeah.
I grew up in a house where we had sugary foods. I had
Yep.
Gushers and Dunkaroos and Frosted Flakes and Pop-Tarts and all, and, Entenmann's donuts and all sorts of crap that I enjoyed to eat. But my mother did a really good job, I thought, of telling me that these foods are not really good for you, to not eat them often, to kind of like limit your consumption of them. But we still had them. And I grew up with, I think, a healthy, I could be wrong, but I think I have a healthy relationship with food.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I have a healthy relationship with food. And I'm able to acknowledge that certain foods are not good for me. But yeah, so how do we basically send this message to our children?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. There's so many things that go into why some kids develop disordered eating patterns. And some of it has to do with how food is approached and what's available. Some of it has to do with traumas, with, anxiety. There's all kinds of issues. But basically, if we want kids to grow up with a healthy, balanced way of understanding food, we have to be teaching them that from an early age, just talking about food in healthy, appropriate ways. Like, look at these veggies. Like, let's take a look at these. Oh, these are all different colors. You know what's so cool about that is each of the different colors has these amazing things that help our brain and body function better. And so when we eat a yellow pepper, we get the yellow nutrients that are good for us. And so even from a very young age, talking about that, we're going to have fish. Fish is so good for our brain. Oh, you want to, be able to really think well and do this stuff. Oh, fish is where it's at, right? And then as kids get into the elementary years and certainly into the teen years, having more sophisticated conversations with them around that, even about the choices that we're making. I'm a big one for parents to talk about their own successes and failures. Like, oh man, those donuts looked so good today at work. And man, I had 2 of them because they just were so good. And now, I wasn't able to get my work done well this afternoon. Like my brain's just not really turned on well. And I'm kind of just feeling like my stomach doesn't feel good. I really wish I would not have eaten 2 of those, right? That's not giving a lecture. That's not telling a kid, you better not ever eat donuts. That's saying, let me just share with you what's happening with me. It's a way to give them insight into the understanding of how the things that we put in our mouth impact the way that we feel, and helping them from a young age be able to identify that for themselves, and not having a situation where nothing is around. Because I feel like there's 2 main groups of people that I see in the clinic, or even that I speak to, in my online stuff, people who have no understanding of this. And so everything is in their house and it's a free for all. Like everybody just eats whatever they want all the time. Or people who have ventured into sort of this health and wellness or nutrition world online or elsewhere and are like, we only have, unprocessed whole foods. We only have, and I'm like, okay, but that's not the world your child is going to exist in. And it's actually not the world they exist in now. When they go to school, they are surrounded by kids eating that. They're having birthday parties in the classroom. They're going to soccer practice. So how do we familiarize them with that? How do we expose them? How do we help them figure out how to make the best decisions for them, for how their body works, for how their brain works? And an all or nothing approach is not the way to do that.
Yeah, I agree. So should parents then, have these foods in the house and then to just offer a gentle sort of explanation? Of course, not fear-based one, but like, this is good. You can eat this and enjoy this on occasion, keep them around, but maybe like on a high shelf or something. So they're not always at eye level like they are in supermarkets.
That's right.
Which junk food manufacturers love to put. They advertise their products with like primary colors. They're always at eye level for children. It's insane.
Well, the marketing with kids, like there have been some really interesting studies done in the last couple of years looking at child food product consumption based directly on the efforts of food corporations and advertisers to target them. And, even there was an interesting one done online recently where kid YouTube influencers are now getting huge contracts from food companies to have their products out because that is so compelling to children. Used to be on TV, right? You and I were exposed to ads for things on TV and it would be like, oh, mom, get this for us, get this for us. And the research shows that when kids ask for things, parents tend to get it. now kids aren't watching TV as much, but they are watching YouTube. They're using apps. And so the advertisers have gotten wise to that. So that's a big piece of it. But again, they're going to be exposed to it. So as parents, it's our responsibility to help them interpret that. Oh yeah, you saw that. Well, what do you think about that? Hey, let me show you something. Do you see, let's go to the store and check that out. That thing that you want to get. Cool. Let's go look at it. All right. Let's look at how many grams of sugar it has. Wow, that's got twice the grams of sugar that a kid your age should be having in a day. What do you think about that? Would you want to have one of these and that would be all your sugar for the day? What do you think about a food that has that much? Let's look at what some other options are. Let's compare, right? You turn that into a learning opportunity for them, because I'm a big believer in avoiding language of good and bad around food for kids, even for kids with frank allergies. We don't want to talk about things as good or bad. We want to talk about how does our body respond to those things? How do I feel and function when I'm consuming that food? So yeah, we should have things around, but we should have boundaries around it, just like we do, or we should, for all other things for our kids, right? Whether it's, foods or electronics or, whatever it might be. We should have some boundaries around that. And parents ultimately are in charge of what their kids are eating, right? So a kid might see the donuts in the cupboard and want those for every meal and snack. And it's up to us to say, nope, let's think about that, because you already had one of those earlier. So great. And here's what I'm serving for lunch. And this is what we're having. And it doesn't involve donuts, or you can have a donut again tomorrow, or whatever languaging or whatever boundaries you want to put on that. But to help them think about, again, it's that goal of helping them to learn how to regulate themselves around this stuff and how to develop a healthy relationship with these things. Because if we just say no all the time, they're going to grow up to be teenagers who, when they're at other people's houses, go nuts with that stuff because they don't know how to think about it and how to regulate it as an adult. They'll probably really struggle. There's a lot of backlash with that. So, short of there being some kind of really, life-threatening allergy or really a significant food sensitivity where it's no, we cannot have that in the house. There are valid reasons to keep certain things out of the house. But even when I work with kids who have pretty restrictive diets for medical or mental health reasons, there's still a lot of leeway that we can find in that. And, even a kid who needs to be on a gluten, dairy, soy, and egg-free diet, we better still be finding some recipes to help that parent be able to make or to purchase some cookies, some things like that, because that's just normal and appropriate and healthy. And kids need to have those experiences with those kinds of foods.
Do you think is it getting more difficult for parents?
Mm-hmm. In general, across the board, do I think it's more difficult to parent today than it probably was in previous generations? Yeah, I do.
Because parenting, it doesn't having a baby, it's not like you go to the hospital and they give you an instruction manual.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I feel like it's just getting more difficult. Mm-hmm. There are all these caveats. And is it a response to, just going back to the environment? Is it a response? Mm-hmm. Is it becoming more difficult because there's food, you're having to act as a counterbalance to the food marketers and the technology and all that stuff?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's interesting because, I'm one of 4 kids. So my parents raised 4 kids, and my mom has said before, she's like, I think it's a lot. You guys have it a lot harder today. I mean, with, they didn't have to deal with tech. It wasn't around. My elementary school got their first computer when I was in 5th grade, and we got to use it for 10 minutes, maybe once a month, right? These things weren't around. It wasn't a thing. Food was different, right? There wasn't nearly the amount of fast food, processed food, that kind of stuff. So in those ways, yeah, it's gotten more challenging. The world, technology is amazing, but it's made the world a more complicated place in a lot of ways, right? We move infinitely faster. There's just so much more available. And so I think it's harder for parents to stay on top of all that. And everybody's busier. The sort of you can have it all movement, which I think is awesome. I mean, as a career-driven working mom myself, I get that. And I also very, very clearly understand the limitations of that too, right? You actually can't have it all in all areas, right? There's things that have to give, and I have to prioritize giving in some areas over here in order to be able to prioritize some things with my kids over here. And I think that balance sometimes is tricky. Is tricky for people.
Yeah. We talked about sugar a little bit and how minimizing it is probably a smart idea.
Yeah.
What about fats and the fat composition of your child's diet?
Yeah. I think, again, this is the thing that has grown out of sort of the broader debate or debacle, we could probably call it, around fat, right? So really, most people's prevailing idea is fat is bad. Low fat is good, fat is bad. And particularly where we need to do a lot of education with people around that is in the realm of brain health and function, because the brain is made heavily of fats. And when we have kids who aren't getting enough of the right fats and are getting too many of those inflammatory, not great fats, we know that leads to problems. We have studies linking things like lower levels of omega-3 fatty acids and high levels of omega-6s to everything from ADHD to depression. Certainly, that's a big area of research for that, to other kinds of mood issues. So we know that that's important. And the problem is that almost all of the quote unquote kid-friendly foods don't have good healthy fats in them. They've got a lot of pro-inflammatory omega-6s, things like packaged chicken nuggets, pizzas, hot dogs, all of that kind of stuff, but they are lacking in the good brain quality kind of fats that we need, like from fish and other kinds of seafood and even plants. So that's an area that I think is low-hanging fruit when a kid is struggling, especially to look at not only how we can start to shift the diet, but also supplementation is so effective there. And the data is really good on that too, of, using supplements with good quality omega-3 fatty acids. Depending on the issues, looking at what the ratio needs to be between DHA and EPA, but we know that there's really important benefits. And even for people who say, well, not every kid with ADHD is going to have their symptoms go away just from taking fish oil. That's absolutely true. But what we know is even for kids who benefit from stimulant medications, for example, we have studies showing that the benefits from those medications increase when we make sure that they're taking a supplement or eating a diet that has the right balance of particularly the omega-3s. So why wouldn't we do that, right? Why wouldn't we prescribe alongside of a stimulant medication for a child who may really benefit from that? Also, a nutrition protocol that is not only going to support their brain and their body, but help their medication work better. To me, that just makes sense.
Absolutely. I'm scared to know if you actually have this statistic, but your average adult today consumes 60% of the calories. I believe it's 58% of the calories that your average American adult consumes come from ultra processed foods. Yeah. I bet you it's way higher than that for kids.
It's very high. And I would have to look up what the exact current stat is, but it's very high. Wow. A large preponderance of the food that kids are eating. And if you think about it, particularly in the United States, in our culture, we were the ones that created the kids menu, right? At restaurants, which is like just a bizarre thing, right? Like at what point did we decide kids shouldn't be eating the rest of the things that the things that we're eating? No, what we do now, not only in restaurants, but in the grocery store, on the advertising, all of that, there's these kid-friendly foods, mac and cheese and hot dogs and pizza and the dinosaur chicken nuggets and, fruit in a cup form, tube yogurts with a whole bunch of high fructose corn syrup, artificial dyes, chemicals, all those things. So even a lot of what's marketed as healthy for kids is ultra processed, which we know does not do good things for their brain and their body. It does not set them up for a lifetime of wellness, mental health or physical health. And it just doesn't give them the fuel that they need. And so parents are like, my kid doesn't sleep well. My kid has postnasal drip all the time. My kid's constipated all the time. My kid is so anxious, they won't go to friends' houses. My kid is bouncing around the classroom and won't focus, all of these things. And it's like, okay, let's look at all of the pieces there, because there can be many pieces playing into that. Food's absolutely one of them. I don't know a kid alive who, if you feed them on what sort of are the popular things that kids want to eat, are going to function real well. That's just not how the human brain and body works, especially not for young kids who are still in the process of developing the parts of the brain that are able to do things like regulate their emotions, regulate their behaviors, manage all of that. So they don't have all of those things operational yet. And we're not giving them the building blocks they need to develop those connections. And then we throw our hands up and we're so frustrated, that they aren't managing themselves well, or that they're struggling in school, or having all of these kinds of issues. So I'm not saying nutrition is the only thing that needs to happen, but the fact that we so rarely look at it and it plays such a critical role, to me, is just such a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There were probably stretches of days that went by as a kid where the first thing that I ate for breakfast, bowl of cornflakes.
Yeah.
With probably some low fat or, some milk variant. Then I went to school and I had a school lunch. In New York, we had pretty decent school lunches, but even decent, it's all shelf stable food. These like lunch, what are they called? Not chefs.
Lunchables?
Like the cafeteria.
That's
women,
right. Yeah,
or whatever.
right.
Just like pop open a can, reheat whatever it was, and then I'd go home. Maybe I'd have a piece of whole fruit, which would probably be the healthiest thing that I eat over the course of the day. And then at dinner, I would have like pasta, like noodles with butter, which at the time wasn't even real butter, but margarine.
Yeah. Well, and, it's interesting as we think about school food, or even a lot of the food programs for kids with food insecurity, because that's a huge issue. But there are some great model programs doing that beautifully. We can so improve the quality of food that we're giving to kids, not only through our school food programs, but through programs in the community. And there are models showing us how, even with the dollars that schools are given, how you can do that in a very palatable, kid-friendly, whole foods way. And, I think that's a great example. I get called in to do consultations in schools. Sometimes it's for one kid, sometimes it's for like just the kids in general. And when you arrive in the morning and you start observing, you see this really interesting pattern, right? Like the kids come in and what are they being served for breakfast? Strawberry or chocolate flavored cow's milk, right? Which actually a carton of that has more grams of sugar in it than the same size can of Coke or soda pop. Okay?
Oh my God.
But it's milk, so it's healthy. So drink up, right? Yeah. And then they're having, their waffles with syrup, sponsored by, I don't know if we can say brands on here, but, sponsored by the popular brands that make these packaged things, right? And so they're eating pastries and donuts and sugary cereals, but it still technically meets the requirements for the federal food program. But what we're doing there is just giving kids this rush of sugar first thing in the morning. Ooh, now they're really ready for learning, right? So they've had all this, they head into the classroom, and what happens? They start on this blood sugar roller coaster throughout the day, right? They've had all of these simple carbs and sugars. Blood sugar goes up. Now they're inattentive. They're having trouble, sitting still. There's all kinds of issues, right? And we've taken away a lot of the opportunity for them to go out on the playground even and burn those off. A lot of schools have gotten rid of a lot of the recess things and stuff like that. So, okay, blood sugar peaks, then it crashes. Now they're grumpy, irritable, foggy, sitting with their head down on the desk. But then lunch rolls around. They come back to the cafeteria. Well, now they're having their food program sanctioned, French fries with ketchup, which counts as 2 servings of fruits and vegetables.
Oh my
That's
God.
Exactly right. They're having pizza, which at many schools, even at the elementary level, is offered as a daily option. Where if you don't want what else is served, we'll always have this for you, or a PB&J on white bread, again with the flavored milks. The salads consist of iceberg lettuce with some shredded, cheddar cheese, and then whatever's in the ranch dressing. And so we start that all over again, right? And there are many kids in our communities who that's the bulk of the food they're getting. And I think that's why we disproportionately see learning problems, mood problems, behavior problems in kids who come from impoverished environments. Yes, there are certainly issues of, what's going on at home and all of those kinds of things. But a piece of it is they are getting the majority of their food and nutrition from these federal or state kinds of programs, and we can be doing a much better job to feed these kids, all of the kids.
Yeah. Let's tackle breakfast. So you're a busy mom.
Yeah.
You do so many things. You've got an online presence. You're an author. You've got a clinic to run, and you've got 4 kids. So for busy moms or dads that are listening, what's like a go-to, what are some of your staple breakfasts, right? Because I think one of the reasons why cereal has become so popular is because it makes it just so easy for working parents, right? But what are some healthy alternatives?
Yeah, and I'm not actually against cereal. I think there are some decent cereals. I think what we want to be focused on, especially for kids, especially if they're having some challenges, if they're having some attention or learning issues, some behavioral challenges, we want to be thinking protein first thing in the morning, right? Ideally protein and healthy fat, but I really just have people think about protein. So if you are going to have that bowl of cereal, let's look at how to do one that has whole grains, that doesn't have a lot of added sugars, and what can we pair that with? Can we do, maybe they'll eat some yogurt with, some fruit in it. Yogurt, meaning a full fat yogurt that doesn't have added sugars, not one of these swirly colored, that's not yogurt, that's sugar basically in a cup. So if they can tolerate dairy, maybe they'll do that. Or maybe we can heat up a sausage or two to go with that bowl of cereal. Or maybe it's a kid who will eat some eggs. And a lot of these things can be done ahead of time. Like even I'll do I have a recipe for protein balls on my website. Easy to mix up. Kids can help with that. They're tasty and they get a good balance of proteins, of healthy fats, of carbs, because especially for kids, carbs are important. I feel like this message gets lost too, especially in the realm of more extreme diets now for adults. I'll have families come in and they'll be like, we're all keto. And I'm like, well, there's the problem, because while that may be just fine for you, growing kids need carbs. So you, in your well-intentionedness, giving them, lots of meats and lots of proteins and fats, you're missing out on something really important, because kids absolutely do need enough of the right kinds of carbs. So it's really about that balance. And I'm all about things that we can prep early in the week, even on Sunday, have in the fridge for kids to grab. I am all about do what is manageable. If you can find, a protein shake or smoothie that's pretty decent that your 13-year-old is willing to, grab on their way to the bus stop in the morning, fine. Maybe it's a protein bar. Maybe it is some other packaged thing that meets more of the requirements of gives them a good boost of protein, doesn't have a ton of sugar and chemicals in it. Great. Doesn't have to be complicated. And maybe you are a family who, one or both of you as the parents is waking up in the morning and making a breakfast of, eggs and whatever for yourself, and you can make some for the kids. That's great too. There's not any one way this needs to be done. And I think that's a really important message with nutrition. And it's one of the things, Max, actually, that I appreciate about sort of your message. You talk about this doesn't have to be complicated, and we don't have to make everything super fancy or expensive. This can be easy. Let's make it easy. Let's look at some simple things that we can do, getting the amount of sugars down, looking at nutrient density, trying to get some quality proteins and fats. And let's do that in a way that is manageable and that doesn't stress everybody out so that they go, oh, we can't even do this. I did this for a day and now I can't do it. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of the messaging that is out there, even a lot of well-intentioned professionals who are putting together plans for kids and families. I mean, I see some of them that come into my clinic and I'm like, I couldn't do that. And I have degrees in this, and I've been, managing special diets and nutrient-dense food for my family for a long time. Some of these programs and plans are so complicated. That's not helpful either, because now what we've done is said, okay, we're going to get really good nutrient dense food in you and also massively increase the stress level in your home so that everybody's actually worse off than they were before they started eating a nutrient dense diet. So I'm just all about making it practical and reasonable for people, because otherwise they're not going to do it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you recommended protein shakes for kids. Yeah. Because I think a lot of people think about protein shakes, as being something exclusive to bodybuilders. Wow. But that's I wish I had protein shakes when I was a kid. Some of them are so tasty. They're like milkshakes.
They are, and they're easy and they're quick. You can mix them up ahead of time. And one of my, big things is let's get kids in the kitchen. We know the research clearly shows that kids who are exposed to food and cooking and grow up even with some basic skills, they eat better when they get to adulthood. All other factors taken out, just knowing some basics in cooking, in the realm of cooking, allows them to consume a better diet. So it's a really fundamental thing we can be doing. And things like protein shakes are a great start. Teach them how to use the blender. Like, let's mix these up. What do you want here? They get to have choices, right? Okay, we can pick the flavor of the protein powder. What are our add-ons? We want to throw some fruits in here. Which ones do you want? What did you like last week? Let's experiment. And usually families then hone in on a couple of sort of recipes or combinations that go down really easily for their kids. And then that's a great go-to. And for kids who don't want to drink that stuff, you rarely meet a kid who doesn't want an ice cream bar or a popsicle. Well, you know what you can do with that protein smoothie is throw it in some popsicle molds. And guess what? Your 4-year-old will love that popsicle or that ice cream bar that he or she gets to have for breakfast the next morning. And it's just the protein shake, but look, it's in a fun shape with a stick on the end and everybody's happy.
Are you kidding? I'm going to go downstairs and I'm going to literally run to the store and get popsicle molds.
Absolutely.
That sounds amazing.
Yes. It can be fun. It can be easy. And here's the thing. We project our own adult issues around healthy eating onto kids. Kids are like blank slates for the most part. I mean, yes, we do have a very small subsection of children that really do have feeding disorders, extreme picky eating, those types of things. But when we're talking about the general population of kids, most of their ideas around food come from what's projected on them from messaging and adults around them. And we put a lot of our messaging around that. They hear dad say, I never ate broccoli as a kid, or, I hate broccoli. That's what the parents say, how can I get my kid to eat better? I'm like, tell me what you're eating, because that's a huge thing, right? Kids, the modeling is critical. You can't say to your 4-year-old or your 14-year-old, you need to be drinking more water throughout the day when they never see you drinking water during the day.
Yeah.
Right? You can't. So that modeling and that engaging them in the process of that, it's just huge.
1 in 10 adults don't drink any water. It blows my mind.
Absolutely. I'm surprised it's not actually more than 1 in 10, actually.
I believe that was the last I checked. Yeah, that's it. It's insane. Is stevia a Dr. Birkin's approved non-caloric sweetener?
You know what? It is, because again, with a few exceptions, I'm not about taking anything away totally. Now, artificial sweeteners like aspartame, sucralose, acesulfame, potassium, those I don't think those have a place in people's diets, particularly not kids, based on the data and what we know about that. But stevia, there's pros and cons to it. Would I much rather a child have, a food that is sweetened with that than high fructose corn syrup? Absolutely, I would. And I don't care whether it's chemically made or grown in the earth or whatever. I think there's these ideas of things that are better or worse, as opposed to things that are definitively good or bad. And so, if we say to families, don't do high fructose corn syrup because that's really terrible, but also don't do any of the artificial sweeteners, and, limit the amount of sugar, we're not leaving, and then if we say also none of the plant-based sweeteners are okay either. We're leaving moms and dads wandering around glassy-eyed in the grocery store, looking at labels going, I can't find anything that fits this criteria. But again, I think that goes back to those kinds of foods sweetened with those things would be ideally part of a diet that includes lots of other things too.
Yeah. So it's not that that stevia would be integrated to the complete and total exclusion of sugar.
No.
But it's just good to have that as an option to just cut down on the overall sugar burden, perhaps.
That's right. And because it's complicated, when families, try to read labels on things, food manufacturers, it's gotten really complicated, right? To figure out, what does it mean natural? What does it mean? It means whatever they want it to mean. And it's confusing and it's hard. And I get it. I have a lot of empathy and understanding of parents who are walking through the grocery store on a busy day, trying to fill their cart with things that are going to be healthy for themselves and for their kids, but also having all of the last 3 blog posts and podcasts and whatever else rattling around in their head and being so confused about, is this good? Is this not good? Oh my gosh, this has, this in it. And then what happens is we get so overwhelmed, we shut down to the whole thing and go, screw it. I'm going back to just the way, that we were eating and whatever. This is too much. I'm anxious about it. I don't know, none of it is making any sense. And so I just think we have to try to keep it practical and reduce the overwhelm for people.
Yeah. I brought up stevia because you had mentioned Greek yogurt.
Yeah.
But plain, not with a ton of added sugar. And so I thought it would be at least useful to some people in the audience. I buy this like fat-free Greek yogurt, which is a very amazing protein source. It's got like 80 calories per cup and 18 grams of protein. It's like, where else can you find that? Something with those kinds of macros. And so I buy it plain, but I always keep in my house a variety of different flavored stevia drops. And so I'll just put some of those in the yogurt and mix it up. And it's totally sweet. It feels like a treat, but it's so good for you.
Absolutely.
And then you can also use that. Another cool hack, both for yourself and for your kids. I'll buy unflavored club soda, and you can put those same drops into your unflavored club soda, and suddenly you have like a delicious stevia sweetened soda. Absolutely.
And those are like sparkling water is such a great option. We're talking about hydration, and how many adults are not well hydrated. The data's there for kids too. And we know there have been studies done on academic performance for kids with even mild dehydration, which, let's face it, most kids are walking around at least mildly dehydrated. Even mild levels of dehydration negatively impact their attention, their work completion, and their grades. So that's low-hanging fruit too, of saying, how can we just better hydrate kids? How can we make water interesting? Let's get club soda, sparkling water. Let's look at freezing whatever fruits they like. And kids love to do this too. Get the ice cube molds and let them make their own fruity ice cubes. And they put those in their water bottle, add some stevia drops, to sparkling water, or there's other options out there now that just have flavors without chemicals and things in it. Look at how you can make this interesting. Get crazy straws. You will not believe the number of kids who are like, I'm not going to drink water. And then I'm like, but pick a straw. And I've got like 6 really cool looking straws. And they're like, that one. And yes, I will drink it. Right? Get them a cool water bottle. Let them have choices. Let them decorate their water bottle. Like, make it interesting, make it kid friendly, and get them hydrated. And, the more that we push in things like water, things like produce, things like, a protein shake popsicle, those kinds of things, the less room there is for all the other stuff that we don't want them having. And so that's also why I'm a big proponent of what can we put in? What can we focus on adding, as opposed to just this focus on what we're taking away or what you can't have.
I love that. Let's shift gears yet again and talk a little bit about exercise, because we don't have that much time left. But exercise, what is your recommendation for parents out there with kids that are just plugged into their devices? How do you get kids moving more?
Yeah. So exercise can be such a dirty word for so many people. Again, adults have such like ideas about exercise. So I just like to call it movement. Like, we're just going to move our body. Let's focus on movement. And so that's how I talk about it with kids and families. And I have them actually look at how much movement is incorporated in your day. Some kids are getting a lot of movement. They really prefer it. They are the kids who, like, the second school is out, they are outside moving. But if you have a kid who isn't sort of, naturally prone to that, you do need to set some expectations around that. And for me, what I have found works in my own family and for so many families I've worked with is you say, these are the priorities. These are the things that need to be done. And then whatever time is left is device time, right? So we need to get chores done. We need to get 30 minutes of physical activity or movement in. We need to do these things. And once those things are done, use the rest of the time for whatever it is that you want to do. And that can include electronics. I think that's a much better way of going about it. Even better than saying things like, you can only have an hour of TV or screen time. That ends up turning into a huge thing for parents to have to micromanage and deal with, which doesn't usually go very well. So I focus in on what are our priorities as a family? what is the most important to us, especially, in the summer months when kids are home, they don't have the structure of school. And there's this tendency for them to maybe just roll out of bed and lie on the couch all day with their face in a screen, but to set up some structure for that and say, here's the things that are important. These are the things that need to get done. And then you use the rest of the time for whatever you want. But physical movement absolutely should be a thing on that list, especially for kids who are struggling. Whether you have a teenager who is struggling with an anxiety disorder or depression, or you have maybe an 8-year-old who's struggling with ADHD or behavioral stuff, they all need movement. Movement, physical activity outperforms just about any medication, any other treatment approach that we use. And we really should be prescribing exercise or movement for kids. But it's amazing the number of teenagers who come into my clinic. No one has ever asked about what they eat or how they eat or if they eat, which is a big issue for some kids. No one's ever asked them about that. No one's ever asked them about their movement habits. Do you get any exercise? No one's ever asked about their sleep. No one's ever asked about any of those things. And they're not getting better, even on prescriptions or even with years of counseling. And they look at me like, why are you asking those things? And when I start to educate them about that, they're like, oh, that makes so much sense. And I've had kids as young as like 10 years old say to me, well, why didn't my doctor tell me that I should, be running or doing exercise every day? And it's like, it's a great point. Why aren't we educating? And I think it's because we have this assumption that people won't want to do that. But that's us making a decision for them. And that's not our role as providers to do. Our role is to make sure that parents, kids, adults have all the information about all the options, and then they get to choose, right? Yeah. But I would not be doing my job if I didn't educate kids and parents about how robust the evidence is behind physical activity and movement and how to work that in their day, helping them actually implement that, because the data is so good that it improves so many things. We should be talking about that.
It's almost like a magic bullet.
Yeah.
How can parents incentivize their children to move more? Because at least for me growing up, I was always terrible at sports. And so I didn't think of I didn't think of myself as like an athlete or anything like that. And so I actually kind of struggled to get, I think, the requisite amount of exercise on a daily basis.
Yeah. I think this goes back to the family system and expectations and modeling. Do they see us as the adults incorporating physical activity into our day? Now, that could be something structured like going to the gym, using the Peloton, whatever. It could be, do they see us going out and taking a real long, good walk with the dog? Do they see us leading an active lifestyle of taking the stairs when that's an option? What do they see us doing? And so when we think about how to incentivize them, that's absolutely the first thing we need to be focused on is our modeling and doing things together. There are kids that I work with who are extremely behaviorally resistive to doing anything that involves physical activity. But there are absolutely ways that we slowly but steadily start to get them comfortable with that. And it's short things to start. And it's always with an adult. Help me take the dog out just to the end of the driveway to get the mail and back. Great. We're not going to start out with a 3-mile jog. No kid's going to do that, especially if they're resistive to it. So we're going to do it together. We're going to keep it brief and, work them up to that. And look for variety, even in fun activities, right? It doesn't have to be structured exercise. On the weekend, can we, go take a hike somewhere in the area? Can we go to the beach and play and run around in the sand? Can we pump up the bike tires that have been deflated in the garage all winter? And let's just tool around the neighborhood. Let's get the scooters out. Let's go on a scavenger hunt. Doesn't have to be this idea of you need to be doing 45 minutes of, moderate to intense cardiovascular exercise. I mean, certainly while that may be ideal, especially when they get into the teen and adult years, you're going to lose them right from the word go. So how can we just start to incorporate this in ways that feel accessible to them?
I love that. When I was 16, I discovered weightlifting, and that became my go-to exercise modality. Is resistance training something that you would recommend for kids?
Absolutely. It can be great. All three of my boys, now I have 3 sons and a daughter, all 3 of my boys have gotten very into weightlifting, and it's been great for them. But where we see that do really good things is not only for the mood and anxiety, but also for kids who struggle with the attention, but kids who also have diagnoses of what we call sensory processing issues, where their brain's just struggling to take in input from the environment. They're getting overwhelmed. And what a lot of those kids really benefit from is something we call heavy work, which is this proprioceptive input to the muscles and the joints that you get from things like carrying a heavy laundry basket or pushing a heavy shopping cart or lifting weights. Provides that really good proprioceptive input that then has a regulatory effect on the brain. So for parents, if you've got a kid who tends towards the real impulsive, hyperactive, dysregulated side of things, even if they're little, and you're not going to be getting them on a weightlifting regimen, you think about that idea of how can we get weight and resistance embedded in activities. Fill 2 milk jugs with water and let them, carry those around. Give them the heavy laundry basket or the box of blocks to push across the floor. That type of resistance and input is so regulating for their brain.
That's amazing. I feel like children with sensory processing issues, that's sort of in my purview because I think I might have a friend or two that have kids that have that. That's super interesting and very actionable. I love that.
Yeah. And there's many more. I mean, we were talking earlier about just how many more kids have issues. Sensory processing disorder it's not even an officially recognized diagnosis, but we do know that it exists and that many, many more kids struggle with that now. So that's another one we can put in that basket of just, lots of parents dealing with more and more kids with everything from mild sensory issues like tags on shirts or seams on socks bother them a bit, all the way to kids with very, very severe and profound challenges with auditory input, visual input, touch input. So those are things that fall in this entire realm that we're talking about.
And that's not even a widely accepted diagnosis at this point. It's
not official. It really, in my opinion, it should be based on all the anecdotal evidence and the research that has been done. Unfortunately, the last time the American Psychiatric Association updated their diagnostic Bible, they declined to include it again. And that's a whole nother episode on how and why all that happens, but we do know it's a very real thing. Sensory processing is something that we know. I mean, it's an integral part of what our brain is doing every moment of every day. And when you have disruption for whatever reason in your brain's ability to take in and make sense of information from the sensory environment, it can create all different challenges. So it is a very real thing and something that many more parents are dealing with today with their kids.
Would it just typically get filed under like ASD or something?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's these kids, if they end up needing a diagnosis, often will get diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, with ADHD, because both of those have become a catch-all for all kinds of things.
Wow.
Sensory processing being one of them, but kids with anxiety, sensory processing those kinds of challenges tend to overlap with other kinds of symptom presentations, but it makes sense because if the brain is struggling to form neural connections from an early age, of course, it's going to impact lots of areas, right? Including that ability to make sense of environmental input. So to me, it makes sense that we would see those symptoms overlay with lots of other things.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
And I was basically always sick. I had a really weak immune system. I tried everything conventional. I tried everything natural. Nothing worked. I couldn't find a place for myself. And I was just sick a lot. And that was my life. And when I was in college, I did a semester abroad. I was in Europe studying. And when I got really sick, I went to a pharmacy there. And the pharmacist gave me propolis. And I had never heard of propolis before. I knew about honey, but I didn't know the bees did anything beyond honey. And I used it, and it was the first time something worked. In about 5 days, I made a full recovery.